Great to have you listening in today. As with previous seasons, it is my hope that the guests and their stories that I get to share with you this season can provide you with the tools and or insights that you need to know that you can make it through whatever is happening for you now. And not only that, that you can have the life you want in whatever way you want that to look like. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and this is the beautiful side of grief. You may be in the midst of experiencing the loss of someone very dear in your life, though what I want you to think back to is a time that you may have felt that you missed the boat in one or many areas of your life. Maybe you always thought that you'd have that idyllic relationship. You know, the one with the knight in the shining armor who takes care of you and you're totally on the same wavelength and you have these perfect children. Or maybe it was having that successful career you always dreamed of. Or perhaps you're living with a body or illness that is simply not playing ball with how you want to look or feel. What you may not realize is that all of these things, and many more that we're going to talk about today, come with their own signature of grief. Throw that into the mix of what you're currently experiencing, and I bet you found yourself in one messy situation. So that's why I have a guest today who's going to help us unravel this for you. Amanda Kate is a spiritual seeker, a truth teller, and her inner sage has an insatiable quest for knowledge, wisdom, and new ways of becoming. She is the author of Divine, Messy Human, a spiritual guide to prioritizing internal truth over external influence. She's a kinesiologist, mentor, archetypal life coach, mother, and so much more. This recovering people pleaser and self-flagellator wants to help people like you regain vitality, smashing through your limitations to find new levels of health, vitality, and abundance. Plus, Amanda also works with business owners to increase their vibration and attract greater wealth and prosperity. Oh, and she also wants to leave the earth in a better way than how she finds it now. A woman truly after my own heart in that area. So, well, actually, not just in that area, in many areas. So the intention for this episode is to help you recognize other forms that grief can take in your life, understand how that affects you and what you can do to help counter the effects of this to live happier, healthier, and more at peace. My highest wish for you always. So buckle up for the next hour as we hear from Amanda Kate. Amanda, so lovely to have you with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here.
I thought that we would just start by looking at how life took you by storm. You were very successful in the corporate world, seemingly achieving a level of success that you wanted. You were focused, high energy, a go-getter by all accounts. And then you found yourself experiencing a loss of self. So can you explain to us what that is and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I had waited a long time really to get my, I guess, big break in the corporate world. And I finally kind of got in the stream and the lane that I wanted to get into. And I found myself pregnant literally within a month of getting that promotion. And it was devastating as much as it was exciting, because it was something obviously I've been working for a number of years and working towards. And to find myself in that position and also wanting to be a mother was this really confusing place to land myself. And I dove into the job that I had been given, and I loved it. I loved what I was learning. I loved what I was doing. I loved the team I was working with. And also I knew that there was this use by date on it, because babies don't stay in there forever. They tend to come out at some point.
Yeah, they do that.
And then settled into motherhood with an intention to go back to work And I went back when my son was 13 months old, because I had 6 months of maternity leave, and then you get an additional 6 months of maternity leave where I was in the UK, plus then you accumulated holidays through that. So I ended up with 13 months of maternity leave. So I started back, and they'd gone through a big restructure while I was off on maternity leave, which I still was lucky, and I had my job. And in some ways it was another promotion.
Oh, that was bonus.
It was. And also my boss was based in the US, not in the UK where I was. I was coming back after so long away. The whole business had changed. And just as I started getting into that realm of things, I fell pregnant again. And so it was like I got all of the things that I'd been wanting, and here we go again. And so I actually ended up giving up work a number of months before my daughter was born, because I was so sick with that second pregnancy, and two, I felt lost going back into a company where I didn't have that close team, that close support. I still had exciting and amazing work that I was learning how to do, but there wasn't as much nurturing into this new role that I'd wanted. And I felt that when I was leaving my child at daycare, I wasn't in the right spot. Yet then
I was just going to ask you that. Were you torn between going back to work and having this work that you loved and then leaving your child in daycare? Because I found that a hard one to juggle myself.
Every day. It was the most challenging place to be. And I know I'm not, as you said, you understand it. I'm sure many of the listeners will understand it. You want to be in both places at once. You know that you can't be in both places at once. You feel like you're dropping balls in every court, whether it be with your child, with your job, with your husband. My family were over the other side of the world as well. They were in Australia while I was based in the UK. And so I didn't have that close-knit support. Yeah. And you put on top of that, by the time I left home, dropped my son at daycare on the opposite side of the town I was in, came back, caught the train into work into central London, I'd already been on the road for an hour and a half by the time I even got to my desk. So I'd get to my desk and I'd be going, oh, my God, and the day's only just starting. And I've been up since the crack of dawn.
Yeah.
So there was all of this conflicting and competing stuff for my attention. Yes. And had I known, obviously, then what I know now, I think I'd have realized that I was grieving both parts of myself at that same time. I was grieving the loss of a career that had only just fallen in my lap. I shouldn't say fallen in my lap, that I'd actually worked damn hard for. I was grieving the loss of this time with my son, who was an incredible little being. I was also grieving the inability to look after myself when I was first pregnant with my daughter and so ill and trying to still run around and do all the things. So that was really the beginning of that loss of self is, well, who am I? How do I fit into this world? What is my role, or what are my roles? What am I doing well and what am I doing poorly? Because the feedback I was getting from within my marriage was that I wasn't doing any of it well and that I needed to make choices. And even when I made those choices, which were to support the family more, then it would bring up more criticism of, what have you been doing all day? You're home, you're not earning, I'm coming home to this. And so then I would, work harder at keeping the house nice and making sure that, efforts were seen at the end of the day. And then it would be more criticism because it didn't matter what I did. I could not win. And that ended up eventually leading to a place where I ended up with chronic fatigue. We'd emigrated back to Australia. I think my kids were about to turn 6 and 4. Emigrated back to Australia and moved to a city which is 10 hours away from my family, because if we couldn't be close to his family, then we couldn't be close to mine. Even though we'd be in the same country, he didn't want to be down the road from them. So again, even though I was moving home, I was moving 10 hours away. And so again, there was this new layer of grief that goes on because you expect to come home to your family. And I believe that that's part of what the chronic fatigue was. It was having a a less than loving relationship, loving to death my two children. Oh my goodness, just adoring them. But also knowing that I wasn't fulfilling my potential in life. I wasn't out there making a difference. I wasn't out there doing anything worthy. I was, yes, motherhood is a really important job, but I had this other pull to do something outside of the family home.
So you thought you had to be superwoman, really, didn't you? On all fronts. Wear that cape and, just try and be everything to everyone. And I think that's very important to bring up because so many people out there are trying to do that, especially women.
Oh, there are so many roles that we hold and we're juggling them all. But the problem is if we drop one without that close support network around us, all the balls end up on the floor. And that's where
did they end up on the floor for you?
Oh my God. I actually describe it like I was holding up the house of cards, but it was inverted. And so I was, just crumbling under the weight of it. I couldn't do it. And with my physical health then declining, needing 3-hour naps in the afternoon, going from being this motivated, self-started, relatively happy kind of person, I just wasn't holding it together anymore. And that started to really kick in about 18 months to 2 years after we moved back to Australia. And from then on, it was just this discovery of, okay, so who am I? What do I want to be? I used to say, what do I want to be when I grow up? I feel like I'm finishing high school. It's like, my kids are going off to school. It's opening up a bit more space for me. What do I want to be? What do I want to do? And my illnesses led me down that natural therapies path.
So at what stage of your journey did you recognize that it was actually grief and loss of all of these things that you were trying to juggle and not being able to do any of them the way you wanted to? When did you recognize that as different forms of grief?
I'm going to be really honest. I think it was only a couple of years ago.
Wow.
It was late in my journey. I had been on this. I had seen all of the emotional trauma. I had seen the psychological trauma. I had seen the emotional abuse. I had seen other abuse cycles at play. I had seen all of this stuff. But it's only really been probably the last maybe 3 or 4 years that I've recognized it was grief under all of it.
I understand that really, really well because like you, I went on this massive journey of healing because I developed chronic illnesses and things like that. But again, I did not realize how much grief I had in my life until after my daughter died. And I was just sucked into it big time. And then it was like I had this epiphany. It was just like grief on so many different levels. But it took that to make me really realize what was happening. So I'm pleased you actually mentioned that because people are probably out there not realizing that daily they're probably going through and experiencing some form of grief. So you say that grief cracks us open to new experiences. So what did that do for you?
Actually, do you know, now that just on a bit of a sidebar, but also not, I think it was actually through the pandemic that really I started, so that would have been about 3 years ago, that I started to recognize the grief that was out there. And I started to look at it differently. And I started to look at what I was experiencing through that lens of grief and going, oh, that makes sense in this situation with this, with that, with the other. And it all started to really make so much sense because also I wasn't just seeing it in me, I was seeing it in the people I was interacting with, in people online, in, the cancelled plans, the missed holidays, the birthdays, the travel plans, all of those things that we used to do together, people all of a sudden couldn't do together. And I think that's when it really, really anchored in, oh my God, this is all grief.
That is such a good point. Yes. Because I think there are many people who are still going through this sense. I don't know how you explain it. It's not a sense of emptiness, but you just feel unsettled. You just feel like nothing is like how you want it to be.
Yeah.
And I guess there are a lot of people out there that are feeling that and haven't perhaps recognized it. Yeah, it's grief of so many things, because so many jobs were lost. It's all of those things that you mentioned.
Yeah. And our
You
whole
went
life
on.
changed and our freedoms went.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
and I think that's where the cracking open comes in, is because when you've got all of, I mean, my business fell apart overnight. I lost 80% of my clients overnight with the first lockdown.
Oh.
And every time we then opened up, I'd gain a few back. But every time we then locked down, I'd lose, I'd almost lose my business. And one of the first times I really cracked open was we were at a dog park only a couple of days after the lockdown. And I was sobbing to my partner going, if I can't do this, what else can I do? Like, this is what I'm built for. And that was that really first major, oh my God, this is grief. And I think part of the reason we don't recognize it is because we don't talk about it much in the Western world. I don't know, other cultures. I can only speak for my own. We don't speak about it. We certainly only tend to speak about it when somebody physically leaves this plane. We don't look at the grief of losing our jobs, losing our marriages, changing relationships, changing circumstances, having to cancel plans that, we dismiss it as first world problems, or other people have it, worse off, or we have this comparative suffering idea of it. And I think once we can recognize and just give a name to what's going on, it's like then we have something to work with. We've got a basic to start with.
I don't know about you, but I think we're so used to being strong and putting a face on things and doing the right thing and not being a complainer, or not recognizing that there are people far worse off than you. So you better just, be grateful for the life you have, sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. And that's always a dangerous path to walk down, because we're always going to find somebody worse off. But if the worst thing that has happened to you is, say, that your car got stolen, then that's still the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And it's the worst thing that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not comparative at all, because we can't compare somebody's worst hurt with another person's worst hurt and rank them and put them into this balance sheet and have it come up with this nice, easy columns and numbers that give us a formula. It doesn't.
I know. And how many people do that? They compare, and I find that in grief too. It blows me away when people say, oh, yeah, but, that was only your grandmother. Wow, that might have been the person that you were the most closest to in your entire life, who was really your mentor and your guide and the person who showed you unconditional love. And to lose somebody like that, even though they may have been in their 70s, 80s, 90s, that is still a huge loss. And
or you hear they had a good innings.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
What the hell? Yeah. I think part of that comes from other people's discomfort of sitting with you in the grief, because grief is uncomfortable. Grief is not something that we want to walk into willingly. And so when you are being vulnerable and sharing your grief and wanting somebody to come and just sit next to you while you're in it, the other person can't handle that discomfort, because that is a depth of emotion that we only feel when we have known true love and true joy. And to feel that deep emotion, to meet somebody, because empathy is about meeting somebody in that emotion, to be able to meet somebody there is not comfortable.
And it's not about fixing.
No, absolutely.
And so many people feel they need to do that, though, eh? They need to come with some sort of solution or, a way to make it better. And it's about none of that. It's exactly like you said, meeting that person where they're at in that moment and totally allowing that to happen in whichever form that takes.
Yeah. It's like people want to bring Band-Aids and, fix your broken heart with it. And all they're doing is, covering you in plastic strips. It's like, this isn't going to do anything. I need heart-to-heart connection.
Yes. And there's a reason you need to process that that heartache and that grief and things like that. Let's talk about some of the healing and things that you've done that have really, really helped you, move to this place you are now, because I know that you've got these beautiful healing modalities, and there's also a huge thing around food and the foods that we consume that really affects us as well. So let's start with your healing modalities.
The things that I love, or what I love most about kinesiology, is it's a somatic therapy, which means that it's dealing with what is trapped in the body, and it is vibrationally shifting that pattern out of the body. So what we're looking at is the fact that the whole body is effectively an electromagnetic field. And I love that there's more science coming into it for people who want to look into Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, the Heart Math Institute, people like that. They've got some people that you can look at for it. So if they want more, they can go there. But our whole body is this electromagnetic field. And what happens when we get a distortion in that field, say it's called grief or anger or sadness, and we go, oh, that's really uncomfortable, I don't want to feel that, we kind of suppress it or hold it in place. And we want to then replace it with something else. But if you imagine holding on to all of these little things tightly that we're trying to, stop, get it coming out, we're shoving them all down, we're repressing them, suppressing them, we end up with all these different emotions stuck in different parts of our bodies. So you don't often put together what emotion is held where in your body. Whereas kinesiology, through manual muscle testing, which is where we test the electrical stress within the body through using muscle testing, we can pinpoint where those emotions are being stuck, and therefore the energy flow or the electrical signal that is being interrupted by that discordant energy being stuck there. And then we can look at, okay, so this is the emotion that's stuck there. This is when it got stuck. What was happening for you at that time? Now, a lot of people will go, we moved house, or a teacher was, shaming me in front of the class, or I was embarrassed by this, or my parents did this, or, somebody passed away or changed jobs. It'll be some big traumatic event in somebody's life that they're not calling a trauma because they think that traumas are bigger than that. Again, comparative suffering. But trauma is anything that we store in our body as less than nourishing and nurturing. And when there's an emotion around that, then this blockage can get bigger and bigger and bigger because we're adding stories to it, we're adding thought patterns to it, we're adding new beliefs to it, we're looking for evidence of it in the world. But when we get into the core of it and we go, okay, you're holding grief in this part of your body. It started then. What was happening for you around that time? And the stories will just come out. I know for me, I can give an example. I remember I was having all these problems with my shoulder. Never had a problem with my shoulder in my life before. During class, we were working on pain. The emotion in my shoulder was self-respect. And my shoulder started playing up the minute I realized I had no other choice but to leave my marriage. So I wasn't respecting myself. I wasn't respecting my children. I was not respecting my boundaries. I was not respecting it. And I just sobbed. And after that release, they didn't even actually need to run the correction on me because the sobbing was the release that I needed to get rid of this stuff that was stuck there. And the only time I had problems with this shoulder since is when my grandfather passed away and I went through grief again.
Wow. And that's it, isn't it? Where we're trapping this energy in our bodies, and it doesn't matter, it can be trapped anywhere in the body. Yeah. If you trap enough of it, that then creates all these health issues, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you think about all the energy tied up in knots because you've been trying to hold it in place and you're not wanting to acknowledge it, you're not wanting to validate why it's there because you're afraid that if you feel it, it's going to be this Pandora's box that you can't put the lid back on. And that's the main reason people don't deal with their emotions. Yeah.
I always talk about opening the lid off Pandora's box.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. But with trained professionals, we can open the lid, we can bring one or two things out, we close the lid and we deal with the bits that we've brought out. until we're ready to
Yes.
open the box again.
And that's really important. It's about not overwhelming the body and just making this a beautiful, gentle, gradual journey of
Yes.
release. And that's what you're talking about by learning to have grief as a comfortable bedfellow, isn't it? Because it creates less resistance and more peace in the body.
And I don't think that we ever get over grief. We learn to live with it. We can have somebody pass away decades before and still find ourselves grieving over them. It's not because we've known that love. We don't just paper over that love and it's gone. That love still exists. Just because they're not in this dimension anymore, it doesn't take the love away. And so when we can look back and realize that when that grief comes up, we can go, I'm grieving so-and-so, or I'm grieving that. Okay. It's like we have more compassion, more empathy for ourselves.
Yeah. And that's what I have learned in my own journey. And I talk about that self-love because that's another thing I think that we're not very good at doing is actually loving ourselves. We may think we do, but if you can't look and stand in front of a mirror and look in the mirror and really look at yourself and tell yourself that you love yourself, then the chances are, you've got a lot of other belief systems happening about you and how you show up in the world. And I think that when we do nurture this self-love, then that flows out to everybody as well, and it's so healing for us.
Yeah. But I think also self-love has a bit of a, commodified aspect to it these days. It's about going and getting your massage or your nails done or your hair done. Or, it's about something that we pay for, we buy. But actually self-love is sometimes asking ourselves really hard questions that we don't necessarily want to answer. Do I want to go out tonight or do I need to stay in? Do I need to do this bit of, self-care or do I need to do this bit of self-care? Sometimes it's having really firm boundaries with the people that we spend our energy with. It's having boundaries on how we allow other people to treat us or what we do with our time, how we spend our time, what we eat. All of those things are self-love. And people narrow it down on social media into that commodified aspect. To be truly self-loving, you need to do this or buy this or have this. It's a exchange of money for self-love, whereas true self-love is so much grittier than that.
That's such a good point. Such a good point you're making there about that. Yeah, I agree. Because for me, the hardest thing to do was allow myself to sleep. Because again, at one stage in my life, I had really severe chronic fatigue and I was never used to sleeping during the day. I just had this stupid belief system wrapped in there that you don't sleep during the day.
Yeah. Well, sleeping during the day is lazy and we've got to be productive, damn it. We've got to get stuff done.
Yeah. You don't want to be feeling lazy or, telling other people that you're sleeping or doing that. Whereas like now I don't care. If I need to sleep, I sleep. Let's also talk about the foods and how that influences us as well around this whole grief.
Well, when we think about everything in the world, everything is vibration and energy. So if we are thinking about the foods that we are eating, if we're eating dead foods, as in food with no life force energy in, do you really think if your potato has been pulled up from the ground and run through a factory, sliced into chips, deep fried, covered in all sorts of other stuff, and then you open it and eat it, how much life of that potato do you think is still there? It's been processed out of it. And there's a few people they've got these special electrodes that you can attach onto food and it lights up a tiny little light bulb with just, putting these electrodes into either end of a piece of corn or either end into a potato or either end into a bit of steak or whatever. There is certain amounts of life still in some of that food if it is fresh, if it is close to source, if it has been treated considerately and carefully and humanely. And it's just fascinating. The more of that life force energy that we are absorbing into our body, the more life force it's giving us, the more life force we can draw from it. If we're eating dead foods, look at those, nameless burgers that you get from certain fast food restaurants. And the pictures will show you fresh lettuce and fresh tomato and looking all lovely, and you get it and it's just hot and soggy. And you kind of go, oh, really? How much life force is in that food, and how far from the field has it traveled with each little step, just taking a little bit more of that out of it? And so one of the things that and if you think about, even to go into what your body's craving, your body will be giving you signals in that. If you're wanting something sweet, it's often because you're needing a quick energy hit. Your body is needing that energy. So maybe you haven't rested enough, or maybe you haven't been eating well enough, and the body's like, I just need something nutritious. And so there's ways that we can actually read what our body is needing, and also finding as alive food as we can to nourish our body with things that our body can actually use to create more life force within.
I love that. So good. And I think there's more awareness coming out now that we need to be going back to basics in that respect. I read something recently that if a packet has more than 5 ingredients on it, then leave it on the shelf, because, anything that's good for you has, very few ingredients. And that's what you mean by sort of going back to source. And in fact, it is our fresh foods and things like that that we really need. Yeah. And you can taste the difference, can't you? When you start to really embrace going back to whole foods, source foods, and that the taste is just divine. There's no comparison. You don't want that burger.
No, absolutely not. And I think at first it's hard because they put things into those foods that are addictive. And so your body thinks that you want them, and your brain thinks that you want them, and the chemicals make you think that you want them. But realistically, once you have cut them out and that those chemicals are no longer in the body, and you've started eating good, healthy food, we don't tend to have cravings. It's not a natural state for us to be craving sugar, salt, all of those things. Yeah. And the more we can pull that out and head back into eating real food, the more our body starts to resist eating those foods that are not so good. I was talking with somebody yesterday and they're like, gosh, there's so many things you can't eat. And I said, yeah, it's because I stopped eating them. And now when I put them in my body, I can give you an example. One of my beautiful clients bought me a little Lindor bar for Valentine's Day last week. And I did share it with my partner. So I probably had half of it along with him. And it hit my stomach, and I had stomach cramps from it almost immediately. And I was almost doubled over, and my partner's going, what is wrong with it? I said, I ate it because it was delicious, but my body does not approve of this at all. And it wasn't until then I started eating my dinner and there was more stuff around it that those cramps then subsided, because my body was like, hell, what is this you're putting in me? No.
Yes. Yeah, that is truly what it is like. And it doesn't even need to be very long before your body starts to react to those things that are not good for it. It really does want those good foods, those high energy foods, those all beautiful source energy. And I think that starts to dissolve a lot of the physical issues that we're feeling in our body, because we're just boosting our cells and giving it good food, and then it does what it's supposed to do. Yeah. There's another way that you talk about being able to shift and process grief, and that's through movement, moving your body.
Yes. Well, again, when we think about energy, and let's just use a creek as an example. Where is the healthy water? It's where it's moving, where it's flowing, where there's, all of this movement and energy going through it. And when you get to little stagnant pools, what happens? there's more bugs, and they're all important too. Don't get me wrong, in a water system, we need that. But our body as an energy system is supposed to be flowing in that constant state of movement and shifting and changing and evolving. And often when we're not moving our body, which is what we want to do when we're in those more depressed states, whether it be a depression, whether it be grief, but part of that is that physiological bit of almost our body going into hibernation. It's a protective mode. So we want to curl up in our cave, put a blanket over ourselves, turn off all the lights, and effectively reset our nervous system from the shock and trauma that we've just been through. It's one way of finishing the stress cycle. And also we know that if we stay still too long, it's probably not in our highest good. But there's an almost addictive quality to it in some ways, because we can then ignore that life is going on outside of us, that life is going on after those massive event changes. And movement is the natural return of energy to our body. Bears wake up after winter and they start moving again. They may start moving slowly, but they start moving. And that's what we want to be doing with our body, is shifting and moving, having time in nature, going for walks, dancing. Dance is an amazing one to shift energy through. But any type of that movement, let's face it, sex, exercise, going to the gym. I mean, sex is a brilliant one because then we're connecting with our lover in our grief, if we get that chance to. There are all of these different ways that we can shift the energy through moving. If we're moving in nature, all the better. If we're moving in tandem with somebody, then again, all the better, because then we're feeling connected to something other than ourself and our emotions. But in moving our body, it's getting that water flowing again. It's allowing those energy fields to sing the notes they need to sing, to create the sounds or the waves that they need to create to keep that life force flowing. And we don't get into those stagnant pools where we're just wallowing and hibernating in our cave more than is necessary and more than is needed. And that's not to say don't have times of hibernation. Absolutely. If you're knocked down by grief, lay on the couch, wrap yourself in a rug, but then also give yourself a bit of a time limit.
Yeah. It's balancing everything out, isn't it? You know, truly. It's all about balance.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about these forms of grief. You've mentioned so many. It's about not having the career or feeling you're juggling the career and it's not shaping up the way you perhaps wanted it to, or it's having the children and then having to leave them in daycare. It's even children leaving home. That can be a huge grief for somebody. It's marriages ending. It's all those sorts of things. So build on those and then share with us what you recommend that people should do to start recognizing these forms of grief within their life and maybe good ways of managing that.
Recognizing, no, I completely understand it, and I'll try and, I guess, bring it in as much as I can. I think you're absolutely right. Let's maybe categorize all of them as major life transformations and changes. It can be moving house, changing job, even just recognizing that your partner's not the right person for you is then a whole stage of grief, because then, you've got to look at who you could have been together, who you had the possibilities to be together, the fact that when you went into it, you thought it would be forever or whatever it was. All of those little bits will need to be grieved. I've been through miscarriage, I've been through illness, I've been through effectively being my own biggest abuser. I had to grieve that. I allowed all of that stuff to be said to me without walking out the door, yet that door was there all along. I could have walked out and I chose to stay for whatever the reasons were, but I chose to stay. And so I also had to grieve that, because how many years did I lose being miserable in a toxic marriage that was tainting my children, tainting my ex-husband, and tainting myself, as well as all those around us. that also, all of those aspects needed to be grieved. Now, sometimes, yes, you can bundle them together and you can look at them. But I think if it's going back and just having a look at, when we leave home, it's not just our parents who grieve.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we've got to be adults and we're looking, we're making ends meet and we're having to pay the bills and we're moving into this area of life that is completely unknown to us because we've never done it before. But also we need to grieve the person we were before that and the person we are after in some ways. So when I had a baby, that day that I got pregnant, which, let's face it, well, I did actually know the day I got pregnant. However, most people who aren't quite as energetically aware may not have known the day they got pregnant. But from that day you get pregnant, you are never not going to be a mother again, no matter what happens to that pregnancy. And we don't grieve that part of us who is not a mum anymore. And we don't grieve then the fact that we're going to be a mother for the rest of our life without honouring that part of us who was not a mother. Or, that part of us, even when we get married, whether our marriage survives or not, we've been a wife. That role doesn't leave us until it does, and then we've got to grieve that again. And so there's all these different iterations and shades of it that we, I think, need to perhaps go back and just go, okay, let me have a little bit of a daydream. What could have been with this? Can I accept that it wasn't? Can I accept all of the horrible bits of me that led to this ending, all of the beautiful bits of me that led to this ending? What about all the horrible bits of everybody else that led to whatever it was ending and the beautiful bits of them that led to this ending? Because every ending is a death. Publishing my book and getting it out into the world, that was a death. I no longer had that baby under my control in the secrecy of myself. It was all of a sudden thrown out into the world for other people to judge and to read my soul on paper. And it was like, whoa, hang on. And that in itself, I remember crying as I put the books out into the world, because it was like, oh my God, this is public now. I could be criticized and abused for this. Who knows? Not everybody's friendly out there. And so, but again, because I knew it, okay, I'm just moving through this little bit of grief. This is a project ending. This is a death. And now it's becoming something else. It's transitioning, it's starting a new chapter. And as we can start to recognize them more, it's sitting with it and asking ourselves those questions. Who could I have been? How could this have been different? Can I be okay with the fact that it wasn't? Can it sit comfortably in my body, the fact that this wasn't the way? How many milestones do you go through? Even for me, again, I shouldn't use that word. I was 9 or 10 weeks pregnant when I lost my baby, and it looked like a perfectly healthy baby. Now, again, my partner said, oh, we can have another one. It's not a problem. Don't grieve over this. It's not worth grieving over. And I'm going, it was my baby. Yeah. I had cravings with that baby. That baby was telling me it was there. So don't tell me not to grieve it. But I then had to hide that grief. So again, I'm suppressing that grief inside of me and not dealing with it because it was shameful for me to deal with it. It was wrong for me to deal with it because that baby hadn't gotten far enough along. There's all of these bits then that I had to unpack and go, okay, can I be okay with that? Can I sit comfortably with that in my body and just hold it? But you know what? I can't remember the exact date now, but I remember roughly the time. And every time that wheel of the year turns, I go, oh my goodness, that baby would have been,
It's like a cellular memory, isn't it? And that's the thing, is that these events that happen to us, they affect us at a cellular level. And so we may not have the actual memory of it, but our body does.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can feel ourselves out of sorts without realizing. And it's like you say, if you just sit back and just allow yourself to process whatever needs to come up. Yeah. There was a word in that you repeated, which is very, very powerful, and that's acceptance. It's not about whether it was right or wrong or, how badly you mucked up or anything about that. No. It's just accepting that was in that time, and that is okay, isn't it?
And people want to go to understanding, but I have a few problems with that. One is we can't always understand another person. So in these kind of griefs, we won't always understand why we were fired or why those relationships didn't work out or whatever it was. But if we can accept it, then it just sits more comfortably in our body. We don't have to understand it. The other thing with understanding is it is us standing under somebody, is us submitting our authority to somebody else, often to their point of view. Standing under somebody.
Yes.
I don't want to always accept the other person's point of view. My ex-husband probably thinks that I've got, I believe that he thinks I've got mental health issues because I left him. And I believe that that's not the case. But he's not wrong in his belief. That's his belief. And I can understand that one. I can comprehend that one. But I don't need to, I can accept it. Okay, yeah, that makes sense when I look at things from your point of view or from what I assume your point of view is. Makes absolute not a sense.
Right.
We don't always need to understand somebody else. We don't always need to understand their position. We don't always need to stand under them and submit to their idea of what it is or what happened. We just need to accept, okay, can I try and see it from their point of view? Actually, you know what? It still feels alien. Can I just accept that that's the way that they see things and that they're a different person to me with different life experiences, different life lenses? Okay.
Another one of my favorite sayings is that accepting people where they're at, because we are all on different levels of awareness and understanding. And so you can't expect somebody to understand grief or like the death of a child if they've never experienced it, because that's not their awareness, that's not their understanding, and that's perfectly okay. For me, it's always about that person is showing up. And I don't mind how anybody shows up. Some people have asked me, really bizarre questions about my daughter. And that's okay, because that was their way of trying to connect with me and trying to relate to it. And I always feel grateful that they've at least made that effort. So, yeah.
And that shows a huge amount of emotional maturity on your part as well, because and acceptance and comprehension, because we often expect people to be mind readers and go, well, that question's not okay with me. You shouldn't be asking me that question. But we've never actually spoken about what we need. What does support look like for me in grief? Support looks like this. We don't have those conversations. If I am to support you the best way that I can in your grief, what would be some questions you would like me to ask you? What would be some ways that I can help you keep your daughter's memory alive in a healthy way for you? And if you are not feeling up to us doing that at any point in our interaction, then you can say, you know what, honey, not today. But thank you, because I know you're thinking of me and I know you're trying to connect with me. You can put parameters in place about what's okay, what's not okay, but we don't have these conversations about what does support look like for you? How would you like me to acknowledge your grief? Because I'm always thinking about it, for example. So how can I show up for you in a way that matters for you?
And I think that applies to our life in general, doesn't it? Because I know myself, I was not always good at putting boundaries in place, and I allow people to take my energy from me because I was so free at giving. I was always trying to show up for everybody, and I was very much a yes person. And so I gave away my energy way too much. I didn't say no to anybody, and I had to learn to say that, and I had to learn to put healthy boundaries in place. But it's okay if I don't join you going out tonight. That's okay. there'll be another time, and it's not the end of the world. And, sometimes we think it is. If we say no or we go against what that person is wanting, that it's going to have a catastrophic effect, when often it doesn't. We just need to be brave, take our brave pills and do it sometimes, and get used to standing up and showing up for ourselves. Gosh.
But that is the ultimate in self-love. That is you asking yourself, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself in this moment? That is true self-love. Mm-hmm. And I think it's beautiful that that's the way you explain it, because that's reinforcing that point from earlier, that self-love isn't the fluffy, massages, getting your hair done, getting your fingernails done is a fantastic way to treat ourselves and to show ourselves that extra love. But what you're talking about there is that day-to-day self-love that shows us that we are truly loving ourselves on all levels.
Yes.
So that was beautiful.
Yes. And I also, I'm going to throw it in there because we're having this good conversation, and it's about not worrying what other people think and how they say things. 99% of the time, it's got nothing to do with us. Yeah. And often we take what other people say so personally, and actually it's just them expressing in their own way what they happen to be going through in their own reality in that particular moment. Yet we take so much on board that we don't need to. So again, it's just like, that's okay. I wonder what's happening for them today that they're feeling like that. And
if we can extend our generosity to them and assume that everybody is always doing the best they can with the tools they have available to them at the time, because that takes into consideration those times where we are in deep stress, where we can't access the tools that we've got in our front creative brain.
Yeah.
It takes into account those fight and flight type moments where we're not fully, resourced up. If we can assume that everybody is doing the best they can at any point in time, it makes our life easier, because then we're not assuming people are trying to be an arsehole to us or trying to offend us or trying to, whatever. Trying to upset us or ask the wrong question. Oh, my God, there they go again. We can go, okay, this is their behavior. This is their resources that they've got available. Now, if they had better resources, then maybe we know if they had better resources, they'd be using them and things would be different, because that's what happens when you've got a better tool for a job.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yes, I love that. Resonates with me. So what a great conversation this has been, and I've really loved just delving into it, and I could just keep talking to you. I know that, Amanda, but I'm going to wrap it up now, and I've got some really special questions that I always ask everybody. And so the first one is what is the best thing that has happened to you today?
Oh, speaking to you, of course. You have absolutely lit my heart up. It is always beautiful having new connections who are just wise and caring and bringing light out into the world. It lights me up. That's why I do this. So thank you.
And I agree with you. I always finish my interviews and I am so pumped. I'm so full of that beautiful energy and that connection. And it just makes me want to just keep going. So even if I'm dog tired, like today, I rushed from work and I was in the traffic going, come on, I need those lights to go green, and, rushing home and like doing it. And you go, oh, okay. And then by the end of it, it just feels beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the thing that and it can be multiple things, but what is the thing that you are most grateful for in your life?
Do you know, I think it is the life that I've built. I have a partner who respects and loves me. I have a beautiful puppy. We live close to the beach. We bought our own house, over 18 months ago now, nearly 2 years ago now. And I'm creating this life that I never, ever, ever thought possible. And it's because I've started believing in myself. It's because I've started loving myself deeply. It's because I have been able to accept all the parts of me, light, shadow, everything in between. And it's made me look for the beauty and love in life.
Oh, Amanda, that just gave me chills. Honestly, it just brought tears to my eye. That is so beautiful. And I am so very happy for you that you've reached that point in your life, because that's a beautiful place to be.
Oh,
And
it's beyond imagination. To be honest, it's something I couldn't have foreseen however many years ago. So every day I wake up and I almost pinch myself going, oh my God.
And I love that, because that gives people hope too, that they can be in these situations that are not ideal at the moment, and they can go to something
it's
beautiful.
so possible. So possible.
Yes. When you're having moments in your day that are not going well, that are turning to custard, what is your go-to?
Slow down and breathe, because most of the time that we go into those tailspins, we're not present. We're going into future worries or past regrets, and we're what-ifing ourselves. What if I'd done this, or what if I do this, or we're what-ifing ourselves to death. And I find that breathing, slowing down, having a glass of water, something that brings me back into presence, I then am able to access that front creative brain and go, okay, what stories am I telling myself? What is actually the truth of the situation, all stories aside, and what can I actually do right now?
Great. That is good. And the power of the breath alone. We underestimate that, I think. Just those beautiful deep breaths, right?
Yeah.
Bringing us, calming us down, and, centering ourselves. So what would you like to leave our listeners with today?
Just be gentle with yourself and remember to slow down and breathe. If, how many decisions actually need to be made in that next quarter of a second, realistically? We put all this pressure on ourselves. And so if we're just a little bit more gentle with ourselves, and I often say to people, there was this research study done a number of years ago where if people had a sick animal, they would give them the exact prescribed medication at the exact times for the exact length of time that it was prescribed. The number of humans who did that for themselves when they were prescribed medicine was minuscule in comparison, but 100% did it for their animal.
Yes.
And so I always say, look after yourself like you'd look after an animal in your care.
That's such great advice. Okay, so we're going to have all the links of how people can find you in the episode notes, but I think it's a good opportunity to share the title of your wonderful book again that's out, how people can find that, how they can find out more about you on your website. So take it away.
Yeah. So my website's amandakate.com.au, and the book is Divine, Messy, Human, A Spiritual Guide to Prioritising Internal Truth over External Influence. So, it'd be lovely to, reach out and follow me on socials or book an introductory call if you're interested in working with me and learning more.
What a great conversation we've had today, Amanda. It's such a privilege to meet you, to spend this time with you, and to have you share your wisdom about what life has taught you along the way so that you can share it with others. And, that's priceless, and I'm very grateful.
The same, all back to you. It's been wonderful sitting with you this last hour and learning more about you and feeling your gorgeous energy. And I'm just so grateful for the work you're bringing into the world. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.